Welcome to our another episode of Make Some Plans. I'm one of your hosts, Kelly,
I am the other host, Angelo.
and today we have a very special guest, my bestie from high school, JP. we,
Hi, everyone.
we are going to start with some background about yourself, where you're based, what you're doing now.
Cool. Yes, so my name is JP. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, or he, him, his. I'm based in New York City, and I am primarily a dancer and performer. I dance with a company called General Mischief Dance Theater here in New York. I do choreograph occasionally, and I am also planning to write more, and I'm working on writing a lot of nonfiction.
How did you get started in dance?
I started dancing because of my sister. My sister Lexi is also a dancer, and she started dancing before me. And I would just kind of watch her when I was a toddler, and my parents would drop me off because they need me to be somewhere. And I started dancing too. I started learning ballet and tap when I was 7 years old. And yeah, I started with a local dance studio in California, where I'm from, where I went to high school with Kelly, the Bay Area. And yes, it was just, I guess, starting from the very beginning. It was a local dance studio. I learned ballet, tap, jazz dance, and modern. We competed in a couple dance competitions as I was growing up. And that kind of laid the foundation for the next big thing in my dance journey, which was Billy Elliot. And I was in the national tour of Billy Elliot, the musical, from, I think it was 2011 to 2013, if my memory serves me well. I played Billy. I had auditioned when I was 11 years old. And if you haven't seen the show, it's about a British boy who loves dancing. And so there's a lot of dance involved in the show. I was just really honing my skills in ballet and tap and modern. And yeah, like that was a huge step. So like already from I guess 7 years old to about 13 years old, I had like learned a lot of dancing. I had competed in dance competitions, both locally and nationally. And then I auditioned for and performed in this Broadway musical that was touring around America. And also we went to Canada for a little bit.
For me, someone who doesn't really, engage or know that much about the realm of dance, to me it sounds like a big jump to go from, doing it as a hobby and a extracurricular activity to going on tour. Like, how does that happen? Like, where were the resources for you to become familiar with the company? How did they reach out to you, or did you reach out to them? Like, how did that conversation start between you and Billy Elliot?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think my experience auditioning for and getting into Billy Elliot has like a nice resonance with just how the dance industry and community works. I heard about the audition um, from my dance teacher, Shelly Pack, and she was like, "You should just try it out. It's in San Francisco. It's not that far." And at that point, I had been dancing pretty regularly. It was like a step above a hobby at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But to rewind even more, I think the point at which it became more than a hobby was like maybe 2 or 3 years in. I was thinking like, wow, I really love this, and the dance performances were really fun. The dance competitions were really cool, and like meeting other dancers. I think at that point I was like, I want to keep doing this. And so I auditioned for Billy Elliot at the suggestion of my dance teacher and also my parents, very supportive of my dancing. And then kind of just a string of auditions followed. The way an audition process works is that um, after that first audition, you'll hear back from them possibly, and you go back to a callback. They see you some more. Maybe you try out some dancing or another aspect of the performance, singing, acting, and it's a whole process that um, goes down who they want for the role.
At that point, you were already dancing, above a hobby. So how did you manage almost dancing like part-time and school?
Yeah. So since we're in the realm of my kind of adolescence and childhood,
Mhm.
I already had been sort of partitioning off time for school and time for dance. Dance always came after school. Before Billy Elliot, it was like it was an after school activity, and so lots of class, lots of rehearsal, and then homework time was like right after that. So it was a pretty busy day, and that kind of actually prepared me for what my experience would be in Billy Elliot, which was that I was touring, but I still had to go to school. I was like a child actor who
Mhm.
was 12 at the time in middle school. And I basically did a independent study program through my school and had to submit stuff online, had to work with a tutor who would tour with the company. And it's funny because it was quite the precursor to like all of the Zoom school
Yeah.
happening with COVID. But
Nice.
I had experience with that, and I mean, I really valued academics too,
Mhm.
both personally and like culturally. Um, Education was important in my family and to myself, and so balancing those two was a challenge.
So how did you manage? Because it is definitely very challenging to not only rehearse on tour and to perform, but you had to keep your grades up and you had to learn for yourself.
It was mostly weekly modules, and like it was very structured programming from the school. Like this
Mhm.
independent study programming had multiple modules that kind of like partitioned off the work, and that was really helpful. It was also very helpful to have these traveling tutors on site with us, because even though they aren't exactly a teacher, because they have to watch over a whole bunch of kids. Billy Elliot the musical has like a whole bunch of kids in its cast, so the tutors kind of had to be a jack of all trades and like watch over high schoolers and also like one like kid in elementary school. So they couldn't be a specific teacher for me, but they did hold me accountable to like do work while I was doing this performance life. This tutor holding us accountable, holding me accountable. It also helped that tutoring time and school time was like a distinct part of the schedule.
Mhm.
Um, like if you weren't in rehearsals and if you weren't performing, uh, you were in tutoring during the day.
Mhm.
So that kind of helped create a sense of structure, which I really appreciated looking back on it.
I was wondering if you could like compare and contrast a typical childhood that, someone going to school in a normal public school or private school would have versus someone who's on tour where they have to like kind of separate their time between performing and doing school. Like, would you say that the interactions you have while there is different from when you're in normal schooling with hundreds of kids in a school or classroom setting? And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yes, I've thought a lot about this, and this is such an intriguing topic for me because I am curious about that contrast. A little tangent. I was working with kids, middle schoolers over the pandemic, and it was just interesting to see them learning and playing in a typical school setting, but also atypical because it was COVID. And then contrasting that with my own experience in middle school and my first year of high school of being on tour. And I do think it was almost like a flipping of priorities, because usually in middle school and high school, kids have school. That's kind of like the base, the foundational priority, like you want to go to school. Um, and then you have extracurricular activities. For some it's sports, for some it's dance, for some it's like an art, a performing art, or a craft, something that is secondary to school. But when you're a child performer, that priority is switched, where the base level priority is the performance, is rehearsal, is your art form. And then school kind of comes secondary to that. And I think for me, what was really interesting is that the normal social context of like school and like hanging out with your peers, uh, that isn't in a typical school setting. You're hanging out with peers your own age and children your own age. In a child actor's setting, that isn't always the case. Like you'll be with a lot of adults who are in the cast, and then you may be with other kids who may or may not be the same age as you. But it fosters a different kind of social situation, um, which I think on one hand is really good for the performance aspect, which of course is like the main priority. But then it also is so different from the typical experience of growing up on the schoolyard, like with other
Mm-hmm.
kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting perspective for sure.
Did you feel like you had to grow up quickly because you were a child actor?
in in some ways, yes, because being on a production of that scale and of that
Mm-hmm.
size, you have to be consistent and technically on it. Like, I think one of the most important lessons I learned from Billy Elliot was really just focusing on tasks at hand, and also like trusting in the collective effort that we were making together. So in that sense, I think it did involve like a level of maturity that was so new.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, like we were still kids, and I think that's important to remember. Like every child actor you see on TV or on stage, like they're kids. So backstage, we were like running around, and we had like Nerf gun fights and played tag outside. So yeah.
You gave a lot of insight on what it was like to be on tour. What were you doing like after the tour, and kind of talk about your progression through dance in high school?
Yeah. So after the tour, I finished up around my sophomore year. And so at that point, I was aging out of the role. I was kind of ready to return to my friends and my community in the Bay Area. And it was actually a little bit of there was some hard choices for me, because I had a couple options before me coming out of Billy Elliot. I could go the route that a lot of my friends did, which was stay in the performance circuit of like a child performer and like moving on to audition for teenage roles and other shows, or TV, which many of my friends from Billy Elliot have gone on to do. So there was that option of staying in the theatrical world. There was the option of going back to school, which I, like, spoiler alert, I did. I went back to school. I went to high school, but even within that, I had options, because I could go to the local high school in my hometown, which was a public school. Um, there was also School of the Arts, which was arts high school in San Francisco that my sister had went to for a little bit, and um, was also public, but was kind of further away from me. And I remember I was like making this decision, and I was like, okay, I think I want to go to school, because like I've missed that setting. And then within that, I was like torn between my local high school, where all of my childhood friends were now, and like an arts high school, which would have been much more in line with me coming out of a musical. So I ended up going to School of Arts, where I studied dance. I entered in my junior year, I think it was like 2012, and graduated 2014. That's where I met Kelly in our pre-calculus
Oh.
class.
What would have been high school were spent homeschooling, or were they spent at a different school?
They were spent on Billy Elliot because
Oh, I
I
see.
was, yeah. I was on Billy Elliot from my 8th grade of middle school until like my sophomore year, would have been my
Mm-hmm.
sophomore high school.
Okay. So you had
Um,
two traditional, quote unquote, years of high school.
yeah, it was definitely an arts high school. I don't know if y'all have talked about the kind of situation at Soda, but it's a school that's divided into different departments based on specific art forms. I studied dance, and it was kind of a similar situation where like we would do academics in the morning, and then in the afternoons that would be devoted to our art.
Mm-hmm.
And there I got to move a little bit away from musical theater, and I did a lot more ballet and contemporary dance, which was a really growing experience for me just because I hadn't done that in a long while. I've been doing musical theater with Billy Elliot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great middle ground, I think, for me, because it was an artistic environment, but it was still a school setting.
During high school, you did musicals every year, I think. And then you were dance captain for, I think, one of the years. Were you dance captain for both of the years? I don't remember.
I wasn't, but I was a featured dancer, I think, in the first musical I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the musicals. They were great interdisciplinary efforts,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fun too because for me I was took a step back. I like did not want to be a lead. I did not want to
Mm-hmm.
be a main character. I was just in the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was still such a fun experience to be able to do that. Though I will say it was a huge time commitment. So there was that challenge.
So when you did the musicals, how did you balance being in the dance department and doing the repertoire for dance, but also you had to do the musicals for school?
That was a struggle. It was definitely a struggle. And I do think there was pressure from a lot of different areas of like, you should only do one. I've always been a very curious and wide ranging person. So I was like, no, I want to do both. And I was able to do both. And it took a lot of time and energy and just effort and deliberation to really be like, okay, when I'm in dance, I learn the choreography and work on my technique and really hone that. And then when I'm at musical, I'm like learning that choreography, I'm working with the group and the company, and just really, I guess, having a time and place for each
Mm-hmm.
became necessary.
Yeah, and kind of like building off that, you know, given that you were doing the musicals and it's like the musical theater, that to me that sounds like it involves dancing and singing and acting, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Yeah. So like, how did you kind of like decide which one would be the path for you? Because I know you'd been dancing as a child, but given that you had to do all three during your time at Billy Elliot, like, was that like a logical like exploration you had to do in your mind which one you wanted to pursue, or was it always just dance?
In a way, I was always and still am a dancer, in that like that kind of takes precedence most of the time. Singing and acting for me has always just been like necessary components of musical theater, because it is musical theater. But I I do really appreciate the whole of it is greater than the sum of its parts. So I would like to eventually work on more music and theater, but dancing has definitely been like the central highway, I guess, with like alternate avenues.
So we're going to move on to you becoming a STEM major in college. How did that happen, since your whole entire life was based around dance, art, musical theater, and then suddenly it's that pivot to, I'm going to study STEM?
Yeah. So, okay, STEM in college. Yeah. So I decided to, well, actually, I should talk a little bit about my application process and transitioning from high school to college. As all senior students know who have gone through senior year of high school, I started to look at colleges as an option. I was looking at a lot of colleges that had both dance programs and interesting STEM programs. I've always been really in love with math and physics and science in general since I was a kid. And so I was thinking I would want to major in something like physics or chemistry or astronomy in college. I applied to and got accepted to Columbia University, which is where I ended up going. It's in New York City. It has a dance program that's really invested in ballet and modern, and they also have a really strong physics program. And when I came to Columbia in my first year, I declared it in sophomore year, but I started taking courses for both a dance and a physics major in my first year. And yeah, it was definitely a pivot, as you mentioned, Kelly, because I've been so immersed in dance and performing arts. And now I was really getting the chance to explore this interest that I've had in STEM. And I think, as with any change, there was growing pains involved, because physics is difficult and math is difficult. But it was so fascinating to me, and I really wanted to explore it. So I was taking a lot of courses throughout college in dance and physics, and also the core curriculum that all undergraduates have to take. And it was definitely a process. It's a journey.
So you would say that you picked physics based on your, interests and, desire to learn more about STEM growing up, and so you took the chance to take that route. Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah, yeah. I recognize that college is a place to explore different interests, and I decided to take that chance to look into physics. I do think there was also for me uh, sort of I guess like a social pressure um, to study something that will be more traditionally successful, um, which I think is an experience that can be relatable to a lot of Asian American kids. So there was that, but I also had a genuine interest and something of a passion in learning about science and physics and astronomy. I was so curious about the physics of tiny particles and quantum physics. Is so cool. I was a really big reader growing up, and I loved sci-fi. I still am a really big reader, and I was so curious about the actual science. I always used to think that like I love dancing and performing, but I'm also interested in the like backstage of like reality of like how
Hmm.
things work. Um, so I was able to explore that at Columbia, and it was exciting, and I learned so much about the rigor involved in STEM and
Hmm.
the the kind of whole field of it. There's so many different pathways for research. I I think one thing that I couldn't find as much and that eventually turned me away from STEM after graduation, I couldn't really find community studying
Hmm.
physics at Columbia. A lot of my friends were in the dance department. There was a couple people I hung out with who were also physics majors, but not to the same extent.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I actually ended up taking more interest in my humanities classes in my junior and senior year and pivoting towards that kind of softer science, I guess,
Hmm.
um, and like humanities, which eventually led to a like more exploration of writing, which is what I'm
Hmm.
trying for nowadays.
Hmm.
And so college is has been such a like weird pivot point, lots of pivot points along that journey,
Hmm.
which I'm sure is the case for a lot of people going
Hmm.
through
Hmm.
college.
And I was wondering if you could, pinpoint any, differences in what you were talking about in terms of community between like the STEM and physics community at Columbia, especially being at an Ivy League, um, you know, really placing an emphasis on academics, and then how that community kind of contrasted with, the humanities and dance um, portion of your career or college career.
Yeah, I do think hmm, it's
Like,
common.
would you say it's like, you go to class and then it's the professors that teach you physics and then the peers that are there? Was there something there that you felt was missing versus when you go to dance and do the rehearsals and, you know, dance with friends? Like, how does that kind of differ to you and what speaks to you more, you know, with the dance community?
So I think the distinction in your question of like this specifically being an Ivy League experience, it was I think that factors in a lot, even more so with physics because I think a lot of students coming into the physics program were like they had known from an early age that like they want to go into STEM and they were very focused and put in a lot of effort. So they were used to living in that world. And the world I was coming from, dance, it was very different from that world. And I think that might have that probably factors into why I was hanging out more with dance people, just because that's who I was used to. Um, but I also appreciated the difference of meeting new people in the physics department. But I think in the end, that I just couldn't find a, a comfortable way in to that
Yeah.
community, which is very much specific to my experience. I have a friend who is also a dancer, and she has continued on with physics too.
Hmm.
She's studying, I think, astrophysics in a graduate degree. So it's very different, and I do think the kind of competitiveness and like hyper focused nature of Ivy League settings factors in. Um, and I do think it's also a question of your own personal flexibility. Like me, I really enjoyed learning these two things, but in the end, the social community of it was stronger in one than the other. And I think that's a really part of what keeps me going in a lot of my passions.
Hmm.
Was there a specific point in college where you just thought about, I don't want to do physics anymore? Like you just don't want it in your life, period.
Mm, yeah, let's see, a specific point. Probably in a lot of my lab courses. Lab, as many STEM people know, can be quite the grueling experience
Hmm.
where it's the nitty gritty of science work because you're working on these experiments that really showcase the process of the scientific process of proving or disproving hypotheses. And that detail of work, I understood the importance of it within science and within my major, but I just there was not enough passion. It's when I realized there was not enough passion coming internally for me to justify that hard work. I think any calling, any career is going to have moments of really just hard work. Everything is hard work. Dance is
Hmm.
hard and musical theater is hard, but it's like, okay, does my personal passion and interest justify like my exhaustion and my
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
effort?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was a point. It came, I think, the second semester of my junior year,
Hmm.
which was difficult because at that point I was like, it's too late to change my major now.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna finish it. Which I will say it's never too late to change your major, but it also so much depends on like specific situations of scheduling, of
Hmm.
finances, of all of that stuff. But that's kind of where I realized I was like, I don't think I'm gonna do this
Hmm.
after graduation.
When you were balancing physics and dance in university, what tools helped you to stay on track of things? Because you're almost doing two different majors.
Yes, I think a whole bunch of things and habits and support networks carried me through both of those majors. I would want to stress the importance of having a planner or having just some place where you can write down all of your commitments. Kelly, actually, I think you gave me a planner
Hmm.
that just like revolutionized my sophomore year. It was small and I could take it with me
Hmm.
and just like write down things as I went about my day. So having that is a really important tool. Um, I think also having, like I said, having a community that of like friends or teachers or just people who you can do this work with to help you hold you accountable.
Hmm.
Um, I think that can be really, really, really important. Um, and I say accountable not only for work, but also like taking care of yourself too, like making sure you have time to both work and play. Um, and I think that's also in the mental health aspect of things. College, I started seeing a counselor, and that
Hmm.
really helped me out through the stress of a double major, of living in New York City, and yeah, just like regular college stress too.
What is it like to move across the country from California to New York and at such a relatively young age? I mean, people always think like, oh, like I'm an adult, I'm going to college, but we're still young and still exploring ourselves. So how was that moving across the country for you?
So moving across the country for me, I had the fortune of having a precedent set by my sister Jackie, my oldest sister Jackie. She went to New York for her master's degree. She went to a college in upstate New York. And so after that, she was living a lot of her life on the East Coast. Her and her husband lived in Washington, D.C. for a bit. So I kind of had the privilege of having family on the East Coast. So I wasn't completely alone going to New York City for college. So there was that support, but it was still such a huge transition coming from California and my hometown and where I've grown up for years and going to New York, this huge city that like everybody talks about New York. You make it in New York, you make it anywhere, etc. And it's a completely different situation. And that did factor in where I was able to really take a lot of chances and choices in New York that were only available to me being away from my family and the people I grew up with, where I was like, wow, I can really just try different things. Um, I think, yeah, there was in college, there was a swing dance club that I was like, wow, like I never saw swing dance in California. I'm sure it existed, but it just wasn't in my immediate vicinity. And so I was like,
Mm,
sure, why not? And now I still swing dance when I can.
mm,
So it really is a kind of expansion of the world.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a very positive outlook. Some people, including myself, I would feel, kind of intimidated and scared to move, out of such a such a familiar area in the situation. Um, is there something that outside of like obviously having family there, was there like something you tried to like be in mindset of to be comfortable moving across the country, and how did that kind of like help you do adjust faster?
Yeah, so I think moving across the country, and as you said, it's a nerve wracking experience too. When I say like there's all this expansion of the world going to a new city, I think to offset that expansion, you also have to like really be good about taking care of like yourself and your connections internally and to like your roots. So, and that's something I'm working on still too, just really keeping in touch with my family and friends back home in California. And I do think that that is one thing that I would really recommend if someone is moving to a new place. I think also trying trying out new social settings is good because you want to keep your connections with your previous life and location, and then you also want to make new ones. And I think I am in a fortunate place now where like I have my family and friends in California, um, and I also have my friends and my partner here on the East Coast. And so now for me, the next step for me is kind of just like, how can I balance these two places that are so far apart? But especially when I started out in the city, just really getting a lot of support and energy from those relationships.
After you graduated and you decided you wanted to pursue dance, so you know, you came out of college and you had this physics major, so what was your like thought process to think like, okay, so I have this major, I'm not going to use it to like my full potential that I want to. So how did you decide like your steps to pursue a career in dance?
Yeah, so as I related earlier, I had decided I'm not going to pursue physics, um, or at least I'm not going to make it a priority. I did look into physics opportunity for like post grad assistant positions or lab assistant work, but nothing really ever came through. And I decided that, okay, I'll take the skills I learned in physics, completing this physics degree, and put it towards something else. And I mentioned I pivoted toward dance. A lot of my dance opportunities happened through connections of people I knew at Columbia, people I knew from Billy Elliot, who a lot of whom were in the city, uh, and and also there was a couple soda connections too. But that pivot after college of okay, like what am I gonna do post graduation? I think, I mean, that's always the question, right? Like, what do you do after college? You've gone through life, you've gone elementary and middle school, high school, and college, and now you're in the great beyond. And so I remember I was thinking, okay, so I have these skills, I have this degree, I will try and apply to some physics stuff, but I'm going to audition most of the time for dance stuff. And it's kind of been haphazard. I've had like various odd jobs, which is quite typical in the performance industry. Like I've been an usher, I've worked in catering, I work at a bubble tea shop, and that kind of helps support me financially while I do a lot of dance and performance. And I think one thing that I've taken from my experience, like growing up and in college, is to really put myself out there when I have the like resources and energy to. Um, I was able to take like a community writing class in 2019 that was really helpful for me. Um, and I was able to dance in various freelancing gigs just by kind of being curious and asking around and being like, oh, like, are they looking for a tap dancer? Because I can do that.
How has the pandemic shifted, your trajectory, if you will, on in your career in dance?
Yeah. So COVID has been such, it's affected every aspect of everyone's lives. For me specifically, it came about in a really busy time. I had the winter of 2019, I had done a really fun off Broadway dance project with a company called the Chase Brock Experience. And that was really cool. And it felt like a milestone for me. It was my off Broadway debut. And it kind of felt like something that could open the door to other dance performance opportunities. And so early 2020, before COVID, I was auditioning. I was still auditioning very hard for musical theater opportunities. And then it ground to a halt. Everything was closing. Both my sister and I were in the city at the time, and we decided to go home to be with our family. And it really gave me an opportunity to touch base with myself of like what my priorities are as a person and then as a dancer and a creator.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was really just a time of exploration of like finding out like, like what kind of dance would I make if there was no outside pressures? What kind of dance techniques would I want to learn? And it also gave me the opportunity to explore my writing more, which has always been, I think, something that for me, a passion started my first year of college with my first writing teacher. It was like an undergrad writing class that really started up that passion. Um, so COVID has, I've had the fortune of using the time as kind of exploration.
So given that like time you had to really explore and kind of figure out what are the next steps, like what are those next steps like right now? Since like the world is slowly kind of getting back to speed, what are you kind of working on right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm still performing with General Mischief Dance Theater, which is jazz and swing and contemporary dance company. I've been a part of their company since fall 2019. We're planning an outdoor performance sometime this year, and there'll also be some live streaming events that I can send the details on as they're released.
Mm-hmm.
And in August of this year, I'll be taking part in a writing mentorship program with it's a writers group based in New York City for Asian American writers called Kundiman.
Hmm.
I'll be in their creative nonfiction program. And so I'll be excited to just write and really hone my craft with a community of writers.
Is your next big career move going to become a writer? Are we looking at that? Or are you going to do like a mix of like dance and art and writing?
I think so. I've always been I'm a curious person.
Mm-hmm.
I like to kind of keep myself flexible as opportunities arise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think having this baseline of dancing and writing has been carrying me through the pandemic, and I really want to dig into it more.
Excellent. Amazing. How do you keep track of everything? How do you keep organized?
Yes, so I have a passion planner that Kelly gave me.
I'm literally like spreading the passion planner love because all three of us have passion planners.
It's really useful, and I think it's a such a flexible tool because I'm definitely not the type where I'll make it really pretty. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I have work this day and I have rehearsal, and then I can write in between or take a dance class.
Yeah.
But again, writing stuff down helps a lot. Um, I think just having a physical thing or some way of holding yourself accountable outside of your own head is a really important tool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that doesn't have to take the form of a passion planner. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've used post-it notes. I've used like this is just my catch-all notebook, um, and other people use their phones,
Mm-hmm.
notifications and reminders. So I do think that's important. I think having a kind of like a weekly or a daily practice of just like during this time I'm gonna do this self-care thing or and like something that's truly good for you, and that can mean like I don't know, just making your bed or like getting a cup of coffee or taking a walk. I think that's been really important for me.
Good advice. Yeah.
What is a piece of advice that someone told you that you hold to this day?
Mm, something I always remember. Um, I think it was my last day on Billy Elliot, which was May 15th, 2013. Uh, some years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but the resident director of the touring production, like gave the speech because I was leaving and a couple other people were leaving, and he opened the speech saying, "The only thing constant in life is change." And this is not a new idea, but it's really stuck with me because it there's so many ways to think about it. Like if everything is changing, like what can I do in my own life to keep things sturdy and stable? Um, and then also like what are things that I can do to change along with everything? And hopefully in both of those aspects, like it's towards like kind of a more fulfilling life. um, so that's my piece of advice.
That's good. I think we all need that, especially being in our 20s. Like we don't know what's going to happen next.
Nope. Very changeable time for us.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, last question. Supposed to be fun. I hope you find it fun. What physics principle would you relate to dance, and how does that kind of like, connection go in your mind, and kind of just like, just for fun, just say anything you'd like about that.
This is a perfect question, Angelo. It's funny because I'm actually preparing a post on my blog right now,
Hmm.
which is an essay I wrote a couple years ago relating physics and dance.
There we go.
So I will say that There's multiple. So in physics, there is kind of a mathematical model of something called a simple harmonic oscillator, which is just like a spring. But like it applies to so many different situations in our environment, which is like there's like pendulums. You can use it to describe like atoms and subatomic particles. You can use it to describe planets in their orbits. So this motion, simple harmonic motion, is like it's just kind of like oscillations, like back and forth, or like waves, ocean waves, electric waves, sound. And the way I relate that to dance and life in general too is that there's always going to be like repetition where it's like, you know, the wave is the same. But then there's also going to be difference where like sometimes it'll go into extremes or like really veer off. And it's just reassuring to me and inspiring to me to think of these springs and these waves, these like back and forth motions. It's always going on. It's like an ever-present musical beat. And if when things get too wild or too extreme, you can always return to like this grounding beat. So that's one motion that I really love, and that's actually the concept that I explore in the essay I mentioned. There's also there's a I think it's called Nether's theorem in physics, which basically states that like you can have a specific starting point and a specific end point in a physical process. But the path between those points, usually it's a straight line, is the easiest, but there's so many different ways it could go. Like if you have those 2 points, there's literally infinite pathways. So that's been really inspirational for me in my dancing and creative process because it really helps to define a structure. If you have a beginning and an end point, if you have a 15-minute timer and you're like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do in 15 minutes, but I'm going to dance or write or plan, you have that specific endpoints, and then you have all of this flexibility in between. But first, you need those endpoints. So those are my 2 concepts.
All right, yeah, I like that. I mean,
Yeah,
totally
that's
makes
amazing.
sense and totally like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
very,
I mean,
very inspiring.
yeah, exactly. I think you definitely explained those 2 life lessons really well, in terms of physics principles. Before we end, do you have any social media plugs you want other people to look for or connect with you?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram at JP Friday. Friday is my last name in English. So I'm at JP Friday. I update about my dance, about my writing on there. You can follow my blog on WordPress. The website is jprambles.wordpress.com. And that's kind of the main 2 social media plugs I'll make.
All right. So thank you so much, JP, for being our first ever guest on the podcast. We would love to have you back. And that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.